today we're going to look at the volume of rectangular prisms. So before we start, let's talk about what this word volume means. Unlike surface area, volume is really the amount of space inside a 3D shape. So consider if you had, let's take a cube for example. I'm just going to draw my cube. If I had this cube, which you can think of as a box, it's basically saying how many little cubes, like actual cubic units, could fit inside. So pretend that's a cube. I'm not really drawing it three-dimensionally here. And that's another cube, and that's another cube. And you could find it going across the whole bottom, for example, and you would see how many cubes, if I were to fill the box, would fit inside. That's what volume is. When you look at a rectangular prism or a cube, when it already has its grid lines in there, it makes it a little bit easier. Now in this one that you're seeing in front of you, you only see sort of, again, three sides of it. You're not seeing all of it. But what I see is that on the base, and let me just sort of outline that, on the base, which is this, I have 3 cubes on my width and I have 4 cubes on my length. And so even though I can't see it, I'm assuming that the base is 12 cubes. And how I'm getting that is I'm really doing that 3 times 4, or that L times W, which is our area formula. However, since there's 12 cubes on the bottom, there must be 12 cubes in the middle, even though I don't see them. So there's 12 cubes on the bottom, there's 12 cubes in the middle, and there must be 12 cubes on the top. So if I really do 12 times 3, I get my 36. So after we investigated this for a couple of days, we started to realize that there was a formula that was emerging. And the formula that was emerging, there's actually 2. Some people think of it as V equals VH. And that means volume equals base times height, which is true. However, you don't just know your base when you get a rectangular prism, you have to figure it out. And when you're finding the base, because we're doing rectangular prisms or cubes, we're always going to think of it as that A equals LW formula. So that being said, many of us think of the formula for volume as LWH, length times width times height, but just realize that LW could be base times height. So there's sort of 2 different formulas that we can use. So let's practice this a couple times. Okay, so now we see a rectangular prism here, and you can notice that there's 3 dimensions being given. There's the 12, the 6, and the 5. And because there's no grid lines, I have to think about how I can go about this different. So again, I'm going to start by just thinking about the base. And again, the base is actually a rectangle. And to find, I'm just going to think about the area, that one layer of it would be this idea of, L times W, which is 12 times 6. And I get 72. But because that's just one layer of cubes, and I need 5 layers due to the height, I need to take that 72 and multiply it by the height, which would be, let me see, 360. Okay? So I just thought about it in terms of base times height. But if I want, I could also use the LWH formula, plug in my 12, plug in my 6, and plug in my 5, and I would still get 72 times 5, which would still give me the 360. In this case, we didn't mention it before, but our units on here, we don't know what they are, so we're going to say units. And these are units cubed. And they're cubed because you have the length times the width times the height. So there's 3 things being multiplied together, giving you an exponent of 3. The last example I want to go over is when you have a 3-dimensional shape, but you can also have fractional edges. And that, when I say fractional, they could literally be fractions or they could be in the form of decimals. This doesn't change anything, it just means you're going to have to use your fraction knowledge. So I'm going to go right from the beginning and I'm going to use the formula V equals LWH. I'm going to fill in that formula, and I can see that the length is 1/2, the width is 1/4, and the height is 1/2. So now I just have to think about what I know about fractions. Well, I know that when you're multiplying fractions, you can just multiply the numerators, and then you could multiply the denominators. So I'm going to start here, and if I have 1/2 times 1/4, that's the same as 1 times 1, which is 1, and 2 times 4, which is 8. And I'm going to bring down my 1/2. And to get my full answer, I'm going to do 1 times 1 for the numerators and get 1, and 8 times 2, which is 16, giving me that it's going to have a 1/16 inches cubed for their volume. Okay, so this formula will be helpful in any volume situation with rectangular prisms or cubes, and sometimes you might have fractional lengths.